Russia has launched a massive attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. At least one person has been reported killed and more than a dozen others injured. Kyiv's mayor says almost every district in the capital came under attack overnight. Drones and missiles targeted critical infrastructure, sparking fires and scattering debris around the capital. Emergency services say they've rescued more than 40 people from the fires and destruction so far. Let's bring in our correspondent, Nick Conley. He joins us from Kyiv. Nick, major attacks across the capital overnight. What's the situation there this morning?
So we've just heard from the mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, that it's now 3 people that have lost their lives over the past night. That figure could still rise. Usually it takes a while to get a final kind of overview of the impact of these attacks. It was certainly a very long air raid alert last night, over 5 hours, and that has been the pattern of recent months because Ukraine's air defenses are able to deal with lots of these targets, especially cruise missiles, ballistic missiles to an extent. The Russian strategy has been basically to do fewer attacks and then try and overwhelm Ukrainian defenses first with drones and then with the missiles in the hope of some of them getting through.
How are Ukraine's air defenses holding up, Nick, under this onslaught?
So we haven't had figures yet. That also takes a bit of time. Normally you get an overview of a kind of percentage of drones that have been shot down, the same for ballistic and cruise missiles. What is interesting about this kind of attack on Kyiv and surroundings, it seems to be less about the electricity supply, which is easier to repair in a way, and where it's easier for Ukraine to then bring in electricity from other countries in Europe, for instance, and it's been more about the heating supply. This country, like lots of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, has centralized heating provision in cities, and basically that means pipes with hot water going around the city and providing, apartment buildings, often, very many stories with heat as temperatures drop. These are not places where you can easily just put in a gas boiler if you're living on the 20th floor. And that is something that is very difficult to repair, especially once temperatures drop, if those pipes were to freeze, if they've been destroyed. So there's been more attacks overnight, we understand, on those plants that provide heat. And it is going to be very, very difficult to try and compensate. Maybe people will be able to put electric heaters in if they have electricity, find other ways of keeping warm, but it is certainly something that the Russians are trying to do now ahead of winter. This is not the first time they've tried to do it, but it does seem this time around that they are doing it more kind of impactfully and more intensively.
Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, has warned of possible disruption to power and water supplies. Nick, give us a sense of just how vulnerable Ukraine's civilian infrastructure is now as we move into winter.
I mean, it is not new, these attacks, right? Everyone was expecting them and in theory should have been preparing for them. That's part of the reason why people are quite so angry about this corruption scandal that has erupted in recent days around the energy ministry, and the suggestion there that people in key posts were more concerned with demanding kickbacks from contractors than they were with actually protecting particularly the electricity supply. I think there is a level at which Ukraine is never going to have full protection, especially from ballistic missiles. From those Russian Shahed drones, it's easier to actually protect the equipment and the infrastructure. But I think there is something that they just have to keep on rebuilding. There is no magic bullet to this.
What about outside the capital, Nick? We understand that there have been reports also, beyond Kyiv. What can you tell us about those?
So I think the most intense attacks were in Kyiv and surrounding regions. There were also reported attacks in Odessa on energy targets, but I think the most kind of remarkable kind of news flash of the last night was an attack supposedly on Sumy with a Russian Zircon hypersonic missile. We understand that it hit a road and didn't seemingly hit its intended target, but that is obviously one of these weapons that the Russian army likes to threaten and try and intimidate Ukrainians with. We don't know what impact that strike had, but certainly this is the picture. Ukraine under attack very intensively, and then there's usually a bit of a break, and then the Russians wait until they have a new supply of missiles to try and get past their defenses.
Nick, thank you very much for that update. That was our correspondent, Nick Conley, in Kyiv.